Okay, so we're going to talk about Chicago style citation. And I felt like the best way to talk about Chicago style, because it's new, is to relate it to food. So see if you can follow my example. On the screen, you'll notice I have two different styles of pizza. New York pizza, which we know as our local pizza, our thin crust, kind of crispy pizza, and Chicago pizza. Chicago pizza, thicker, almost like a goddamn casserole, as the little description says. In many cases, you like one or the other. But let's think about what they have in common. The first thing they have in common is they share the same ingredients. Think about it. We have flour and yeast and a little bit of olive oil and maybe some salt that make up both crusts. On the top, we have both a tomato sauce of some type and some cheese. So they have the same ingredients, but the way they're put together is different. We eat pizza for the same reason. Whether you choose a New York style pizza or a Chicago style pizza, the reason that you choose it is the same. You're hungry and you like pizza. So there's lots of similarities. That's the way I want you to think about citation as well. So imagine we cross out this New York and we make it MLA, but we keep this Chicago. That's what we're talking about when we talk about the difference between MLA citation, which is probably the one you're the most familiar with, and a Chicago style citation, which has a lot of the same ingredients, but the way it's put together is a little bit different. The reason that you have two different styles is because people like choices, and the choices are important. So MLA, or that New York style pizza, is the most common. It's the one used by English teachers and many other subjects. It's the one that we use almost exclusively at South Brunswick High School. When you get to college, some departments, like history departments or sociology departments, choose to use a Chicago style. It's just a different form of the same thing. The most important reason and the reason why we cite things remains the same. We want to give credit to that original source. But the type of credit we give depends on the person's tastes that's asking you to cite it. We're going to do a few things today. We're going to review why citations are important. We're going to compare, like we just did, the Chicago style citation to the MLA citation that you're used to. And we're going to do it by creating a sample citation for a Supreme Court case on Oyez. We're going to share tools that will help you with your citations, whether your teacher wants you to do MLA or Chicago in their classroom. And remember, your teacher is the one who's deciding what would be the correct citation for you. So the first thing we're going to give you is a comparison chart. And you have a link to this that has been shared with you on Classroom. So you have this as a spot to go forward, but we're going to take a quick look at it. But I want you to notice that just like pizza, citation styles share the same goal to credit the source, but fit different tastes. So let's take a look at our Universal Citation Guide as a starting point. And this is something that I made for you so that you had all three different types of citation styles in one handy document. You'll notice that, just to give you a little bit of navigation help, the left-hand column here describes what you're going to be citing. And each column features a different type of citation style. We have MLA, that's the one you're most familiar with from your English classes, which has a works cited page. It's used in most humanities courses. And the author is the most important thing on that citation style. That's the reason it's preferred by our English department. They're more concerned about who wrote the work. Now, APA we're not going to talk about in this video, but Chicago we are going to talk about. Now, I want you to keep in mind with Chicago that it's used with history courses. So why are we showing it to you? Because if you go to a liberal arts college, eventually someone is going to ask you to cite something in Chicago style, and we don't want it to be a surprise to you. We want you to at least be able to have had a taste of it, to extend my pizza reference, and be able to look at it and decide what kind of parts you're going to need to make that citation. The key difference between MLA and Chicago is that instead of a works cited page at the end of your document, you're going to have a bibliography, okay? So your title is going to be different. I also want you to notice as we talk about it, there's a few little differences between each type of cite that you may need to do. In this case, the history department wants you to use this because the source is important. You're also going to notice that you use footnotes instead of those in-text citations inside parentheses that you're so used to. And we'll look at those in a minute. And that's because the source is important to what is happening in the text, and we want to have that side by side. That's why people like to cite in Chicago. Now, if you look down the list, there's not a huge difference. We're going to go to I have books, but we're going to go to something you use all the time, an online source. In this case, we're looking at an online source that does not have an author, and that's going to be what we're going to cite today. It's little tricky things like the URL is going to look a little different. So that link that you include is going to look a little different. In this case, in an MLA, you do not include that HTTP. In a Chicago, you do. Okay? Little difference, just you checking will make the difference in doing this correctly or not. And I want you to look at the example, because here in my example, I have a website and it shows you exactly what it should look like. The big difference is here, the name of the site is italicized for MLA, and it's not over here, okay? You'll also notice that the arrangement, the order is a little bit different over here, okay? The date is a little bit different. If you look over here, we have accessed 11JUL.2022. Here we have accessed July 11th, 2022. Again, this is not rocket science. It's just a tiny bit different for each citation. The important thing is that you have a good guide to go to that can help you to figure out how to cite those things, okay? So that's what this guide is designed to do. Now let's take a look at a website that's going to give you a model for how to do this. So how to cite an OEA case, that's that online database of Supreme Court cases that you might have used before in your work. Now let's go to OEA so we can take a look at what's offered here. And I'm going to pull up a Supreme Court case so that we have an article to look like. I'm going to do a familiar one, Brown v. Board of Education, which we talked about when you were in American government, okay? Now here's what I like about OEA, and I want you to remember OEA is not just a website, it's really a database. It's just a free database that you're using online. Whenever you're using a database, you always want to make sure that you are thinking about, does this database help me to cite my source? So we're going to do this two different ways. First of all, let's find our case article. Here's Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka, and this is the first case. So we want to use this one as our example. Now what I like about OEA is it's going to have all of the different parts of this case broken down very clearly. So you have the facts on the case, the question that was being asked, the conclusion the justices came to, so their decision explained to you, and we're going to use this as our example. So there's a couple of different ways we can cite this. First of all, we can use MyBit. I want you to notice that I'm using the extension here, okay? You can download that to your Google Drive if you don't have it already, so it will appear at the top of your page. But look what it does. It doesn't make me a nice citation. This is a case where it's going to need significant help to get this right. So I can't just click and copy. I need to change it. The reason I know I need to change it is because, look at it. It's citing nonsense. Meta page title, how's that going to help us if we need to go back to this source? Meta site name, that again doesn't help me. The date's not significant either. So I'm going to need to do some significant changing to this in order to get it to cite the way I want it to. So the truth is, I could go in and help it out. I could say, okay, my title of my web page right now is called Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka. And this is case number 1, so that would be the title of my page. Remember, we could fill in the website. That's oea.org. Okay, easy enough. Okay, I can get that from here. The date it was published, well, I happen to know that there's no publication date or update date on this particular page, but I'm going to use the date it was accessed by me. So I can use all of this information and then say update, okay? And then I have a decent citation. If you look at it, you can see it has Brown v. Board of Education Topeka, has oh yay. What's this ND? Ooh, I'm not sure. I don't know if that's right or not right. I have January 16th, 2023. Remember, my date in Chicago is important, and that does look right. And I have the link with that HTTPS. So this all looks okay. The only thing I'm wondering about is that ND. I'm also noticing that my in-text citation, if I were to use it, which remember, I wouldn't for Chicago, looks kind of wacky. But with Chicago style, I'm not putting in an in-text citation. I'll show you that in a minute. So this doesn't really matter, but this still looks just a little bit strange with that ND. I think I could probably do better, but this isn't a bad start. So we could copy this and we could put it in our bibliography, which was what we call our works cited page on a Chicago paper. But I'm going to try something else too. I want you to notice that since this is a database, I can go all the way down to the bottom, and in this database, I actually have the citation provided for me. Now my default here is MLA, so it's going to look familiar to you. But if I want to take it to Chicago, all I have to do is click, and it will allow me to copy and cite. So let's look at this one for a minute. Here we start with the title of the case. We have the website title. We also have the access date, which is important, and we have that link. So this looks actually like a better citation than what I had to help my bib give me. So my advice here is if the citation exists, either because you're using a database or the website is a database that helps you out, use the citation provided. It's going to be more correct than what you probably will get from a tool like MyBib. Although, if you're going to use MyBib, make sure you're thinking critically about what it's giving you. Remember that meta page looks wacky and we don't want to use that. So for now, I'm going to copy this so that I have it. Now, the difference between a citation in Chicago and a citation in a regular MLA works cited is I'm going to show you what it looks like through examples. So remember, if you were going to be citing this paper in MLA format, and let's look at this first green piece. This is a quote, and I know because of the text around it that it comes from this source called In Democracy, Other Neoliberal Fantasies by Jody Dean. So I did a little bit of my homework here, and I started you a bibliography. So here's that Dean reference. Now here's what you should know about a bibliography and endnotes in a Chicago-style paper. If I were creating an in-text for this, and I was doing it in MLA format, after that quote, I may put the author's name, because remember, in an MLA paper, I always use the first word or words. Usually that is the author's name or the first part of the title. That's what you're used to. But for a Chicago paper, we work on this differently because Chicago doesn't care about an in-text. Instead, what they would like you to do is they want you to insert a footnote. So in Google Docs, you'll notice it says insert footnote. When you do that, it's going to give you two things. First of all, let's look at our starting point. This is where I inserted. See how it gives me that little superscript? And that's going to supply me a spot down here that will allow me to put the citation. Now, Chicago is different than MLA. So this whole piece is going to go into my citation. Okay, the first time I use it, I put the whole thing in here. That way my reader knows that when they get to this spot, if they want to see what source I used, they're going to look down at the bottom of my page at the footnote. Okay, so again, that's insert footnote. Let's do the second one. Okay, here's my second piece of text. Again, this is a quote. You can see it's inside quotation marks. If I look at the sentence, it tells me Michael Hart and Antonio Negri, on the other hand, argue that the internet is an exemplar of the rhizome, a non-hierarchical, non-centered network, a demographic network with, quote, and there's my quote, don't ask me what this means, okay? The text came right off of a sample paper on the Chicago example from OWL. But remember, we don't care right now what the context is. We just want to know how to cite this quote. So again, I'm going to make sure that my cursor is right after the quotation. I'm going to go to Insert, and I'm going to go to Footnote. And that footnote is going to allow me to put a citation there. So there's my citation right down at the bottom. Okay, I've got my number 2. And again, since I know it is that source from Michael Hart and Antonio Negri, I'm going to go to my works cited. I'm going to pick up that source. And the first time I use it, I'm going to paste it in my superscript. Okay, so it's going to tell me if I get to this point in the paper and I want to know more about this source, if I look down the page, I should see it down at the bottom. Okay, so that's pretty easy. Just insert footnote and that'll get you your citations. You'll notice at the end of the paper, you put the entire source so that you know what that is. Now, if you were to continue with this, you would need to know how to cite subsequent sources. And I've given you some of that information in both the presentation that was shared with you and the sample paper. So this is my sample paper, and this is a linked document so you can look at it critically. This is a great thing to look at when you're trying to put together a works cited for the first time, because it allows you to go in and actually click on the document, and it becomes a talking document that's going to help you to figure out how to cite things. These are really, really helpful, and they're available on OWL. Again, I've linked this one here. Remember, this is the passage that I was working with in my Google Doc, but it shows you exactly why the little footnotes are done the way they are done and what the paper should look like. So this is really helpful. You can see that the citations are down below as well, and it tells you exactly what should be in your citation. Okay, so now you know how to put it into your paper. You'll also notice that there's a change in how the sources are cited going forward. All right, they look different as they go forward, and they give you an explanation about that. I encourage you to read those explanations so that you understand what subsequent footnotes should look like for that source in your document. You'll notice that you don't use the entire source after you've cited it for the first time. In this case, you just use the author's name and the page number, but in the author's name, you're going to make sure that you include enough that your reader understands when they look at the bibliography what exactly they're looking at as far as a source goes. So if we scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll see the bibliography. And again, all these little boxes tell you a little bit more about each of the sources. Notice that it says bibliography up at the top, and then your sources are included alphabetically, just like they would in an MLA works cited. And you have all of them in your bibliography as well. Okay. The only difference, and you'll notice this on our Universal Citation Guide, for things like OYA, if you're looking at an online source, like a web page, website titles are not italicized, that's a difference, and citations for websites only appear in your individual footnotes, not in the bibliography. Now, in the sample I gave you here, I included it. As a high school student, I think it's good practice to have all of your citations listed here. So you'll notice in my sample paper, I gave you Brown versus Board of Education and that OYA source among the print sources. The reason for that is when you get to college, there aren't that many websites that you will end up citing. You mostly cite books and journal articles, not necessarily a website. But because we're still in high school and because we are trying to sample the Chicago style, we're not going to live or die by it, I would say it's good practice to put in your website in your bibliography. Helps your reader to know more about the sources you're crediting, so I think it's fine to include it here. Okay, so just to review, here's what we have so far. We've given you that Universal Citation Guide. We've also given you this citation paper or the sample paper that's going to be helpful to you. This guide is going to be your basis. So everything that you note on here, I've kind of pre-approved for what works for a high school source. Okay, so you'll see all of that. Remember, if you're doing anything that comes from a database, check the database. Most have a citation included. Good reason to use a database. Okay, even if it's an online database like OYE, you're going to see a citation. So use that citation. It's already vetted by the database. They want you to credit their sources, so it's probably going to be done correctly. Those are the basics of how to cite a source and build a bibliography in a Chicago style project or paper. If you have any questions, you can always come and ask. Good luck!